Carolyn Maloney, the Democratic chairwoman of the Committee on Oversight and Reform, has been trying to launch an investigation of Parler. The investigation is Parler a Russian asset? Is Parler operating at the behest of the Kremlin? Also, what was Parler's role in January 6th? So even after this kind of big tech strike on Parler, there's an effort by Congress to get in on the act. Congress, of course, has been pressing the big tech companies to censor more. In other words, censor even more promiscuously on behalf of the left and of the Democratic Party. And Parler has just sent a very telling letter to Carolyn Maloney, a letter that has facts that we didn't know before. Number one, in the days and weeks leading up to January 6th, Parler referred violent content from its platform to the FBI for investigation over 50 times. And Parler even alerted law enforcement to specific threats of violence being planned at the Capitol. In other words, far from being complicit with this kind of any kind of planning or insurrection or violence, Parler realized that if there are people who are planning something bad, we're going to let the FBI know. And Parler was working back and forth with the FBI. They sent on December 22nd, this is long before January 6th, they sent the FBI 3 screenshots of particularly violent rhetoric from a user who had threatened to kill politicians and specifically threatened Bill Barr. And then later, around January 6th, Parler was pulled out people who had said things like hang Mike Pence. So even though this is just rhetoric, people could just say, I'm just saying, it's like people say, oh, I could kill you. Doesn't mean you're going to. But nevertheless, Parler was alarmed enough that it supplied these tweets to its FBI contact. Parler, it turns out, has absolutely no contact with the Russians. They have no Russian owners. They don't even have any Russian contractors. Now, the former CEO, John Mates, his wife happens to be of Russian origin. And there was apparently some minor contract with one of the wife's relatives, but this had nothing to do with Putin or the Kremlin. Interestingly, when Congress, in trying to bust Parler on this, had made a reference to an individual, the idea here was that Parler was somehow complicit with violence. But it turns out that this individual was planning his nefarious activities not on Parler. He was actually doing it apparently on Facebook. And of course, there's now been some studies of this by George Washington University and others showing that there was far more kind of conspiratorial activity on the other platforms than there was on Parler at all. So the bottom line of it is that Parler here was clearly singled out. Parler here, here's an example. The committee's letter to Parler mentions this guy, William McCall Calhoun, and says, this guy made some violent threats on Parler. And then Parler points out, however, in the very same affidavit that the committee itself cites, there are far more incriminating and incendiary posts by the same user on Facebook, including a photo from outside the Capitol that the guy posted basically saying, we're going to get inside the Capitol before this ends. So what Parler is saying to Congress is, if you want to apply some sort of investigation, why are you just investigating us? Why aren't you investigating all the other social media companies? And of course, the answer is simple. The other social media companies have been funneling vast amounts of money to Democratic candidates. They've essentially, well, you might almost say, bought off the Democratic Party. So Congress, or at least Maloney, wants an investigation of Parler, but when you read these documents and you read what's really going on, it almost seems like the real investigation that needs to happen is an investigation of the relationship between big tech and big tech money and the Democratic Congress. That's what really needs to be investigated. Now, of course, it's never going to happen. Why? Because the Democratic Congress is not going to have an investigation into itself. That's not going to happen. But I hope that Parler's lesson from this is not to appeal to the sort of benign forces at big tech. Oh, please take us back in, we'll behave ourselves. Or not to appeal to the good graces of Carolyn Maloney or Congress, the Democratic Congress. Hey, listen, Congress, do the right thing. We cannot count on them to do the right thing. And what this means is that Parler needs to build up an infrastructure of operations, an infrastructure not only of functionality, but of apps, so people can get the Parler app as they used to have it. Maybe not an Apple app, but some other kind of an app, and do it so that Parler doesn't need these guys. It doesn't need Google. It doesn't need Amazon. Here's my Parler mug. You can kind of see which side I'm on. I think it's vitally important that we build up these alternative platforms so that the other side not only doesn't want to hurt us, they do, but so they can't.